All right, good morning, y'all. We're going to do a Bates Nursery Botanical Bootcamp, kind of a little quick one about raised garden beds. I know this is something everyone's kind of working on right now. We're kind of in full spring swing, and plants are coming in, plants are going out, and now's a great time to start looking at your beds. So, yeah, we're going to talk with gardening with raised beds, and I'm going to have a little slideshow we're going to go to in a second. I'm Ben here at Bates Nursery, and let's get on with it. So, yeah, gardening with raised beds, construction and planting. We're going to take on some basics, and then y'all probably have some questions and let us know at the end. But, yeah, I'm going to go ahead and move to my slideshow here. And again, gardening with raised beds, construction and planting. Get asked about this a lot, and we're just going to go through it. And I'll show you some pictures of my raised bed project so y'all can get an idea of one way you can undertake it. Okay, so just kind of get an idea for why you're going to do raised beds, what the big deal is about. Do you even need to do it? The reasons we're doing raised beds for the most part, shallow existing soil, say your bedrock is only a few feet down, adding soil so that those plants can grow deeper roots, wet areas and drainage issues. If you've got a standing water, a creek running nearby, that bed is going to lift those plants up out of that wet area, allow them to dry out. Accessibility and movement, so the beds can become a pathway for you to move in and out of your garden, and also make it accessible for wheelchairs. Ooh, that lights in my eye. Make it accessible for like wheelchairs, for kids harvesting. Just make it easier to get to your garden beds. And then for easier pest and weed control. So raised beds, you can put tarps over them. You can put mesh for birds over them. You can put stuff over them to help with weed control. So you get a little more control over covering this area than you would in the ground. And then what can you grow in raised beds? So almost anything that goes in the ground can go in a raised bed, but it's about what, do we really need in the raised bed? What's going to be beneficial? Crop rotation becomes important in these raised beds, so think about what you're putting from year to year. That crop rotation, because that raised bed has enclosed soil, we want to be careful about how much nutrient we have from one year to the other by switching up what crops we're growing. Drier, so we talked about the water. Raised beds tend to dry out, which can be a benefit, and it can also be a drawback. So, if it tends to stay wet, that's going to keep our plants dry and healthy. If it tends to stay dry, we're going to need to water our raised beds more often than in the ground. Hoop structures. So, once you have a raised bed, you can put hoop structures on that. So you can have kind of a cold frame or a hoop house to extend your growing season. It kind of opens up those options. And then I mentioned cover crops or plastic. So in the wintertime with a raised bed, you can easily cover that, seal it off, and really clean up your beds for the next year. And it just makes it a little more accessible. And then just when we're talking about plants, I mean vegetables, herbs, annuals, and then fruits. Like I've got a little dwarf bushel and berry blueberry. There are little dwarf fruiting shrubs out there that would do fine in a raised bed. Just know, typically with a shrub, you're going to leave it. You're not going to rotate it out. Okay, so early spring, what are we ready to plant? It's getting warm. Maybe frost is behind us. Not 100% sure. Hardier edibles and shrubs. So any shrub, vines, things like that are fine. And then hardier plants. So plants that already have a decent stem on them. They've got leaves that have hardened off. No tender new growth. Of course, cold hardy vegetables should be fine right now. So your spinaches, your greens, your broccolis should be fine in the ground. Just avoid like those seedlings. If you still have little weak seedlings with one set of leaves, a little floppy stem, probably safe to not put them outside quite yet till we know we're not going to have a freeze in late April. But the weather is looking favorable, so no freeze in the next 10 days looks like. We'll keep posted on that. Just, proceed with caution. The raised beds will probably stay a little cooler because they're out of the ground, but you can cover those plants on a freezing night. So, if that helps you make up your mind to plant, you can easily put plastic over it in a freezing night and buffer that cold in a raised bed. And then washout in the spring. I mean, my yard gets flooded and it rolls away. That raised bed kind of saves those vegetables when that water comes across the property. So it can really alleviate these heavy spring washouts. So, start thinking about what you're going to plant. Like I said, things that are tougher, more mature right now should be good to go outside, but still proceed with caution. I do want to mention containers and pots as raised beds. You can definitely grow stuff in a container. Great for limited spaces. If you just don't have property, ground to get to, you can do a container garden on your porch. Choose a special variety, like a blueberry that's compact. There's some tomatoes that are made to go in a pot. Cucamelons instead of watermelons, something that's smaller and won't deplete the soil. Large fruiting vines, like big melon, pumpkins, those are just really going to use up all the fertilizer in that pot. Probably not going to be a great producer in a container. But herbs do amazing in containers. I mean, potatoes, you can do tomatoes, a lot of those. Dwarf compact varieties are suggested, and there are a few out there. And then in the container, you're going to need to water a lot more often. So think of that. We don't have access to the groundwater like in our raised beds. So just a consideration, lots of stuff you can do in containers with limited space. Okay, so I'm going to show you all a few pictures of this past summer and then this year. So I'm doing a little raised garden project. Spring of last year, I was kind of transitioning from cool season to warm season crops, but I have a single layer raised bed here. This is about 2 or 3 years old, but really I can get an idea of what is in the bed. I've probably got 3 main areas of different planting. And looking at this old image, I can kind of plan what I want to do this year. So, where I had potatoes in one side of the bed, I'm going to flip-flop those to the other side of the bed just so I get rotation. Where I had tomatoes, I'm going to put where the potatoes were. So I'm just going to rotate to reduce a lot of pressure. But as you can see, I have straw down on the ground because there's a lot of water that rolls through here. It gets mushy. This straw also suppresses weeds. But yeah, you can see there's a barrier between the lawn and the bed. This allows weed control a little easier, slows the spread. I still get weeds because I don't spray any herbicide around my veggie garden. This bed is going to make it easier to control those weeds creeping in. I still have them, still have to deal with them, but it's easier. That's spring of last year. And then move forward. So during the winter, I decided to do some cover crops. I did fava beans. They survived all winter. They did great. They grew a little bit. But the goal with this in that raised bed is to add some nitrogen back. And so if you grow a cover bean or a cover crop in that bed, you can till that in before the next season, and it should provide nitrogen. So on the left, that's my fava beans growing. And then if you look on the right, that's them pulled out of the ground. And what we're looking for, I don't know if y'all can see it, but there's let's see if I can get my pointer up here. There's little bitty white nodules on those roots, and that's actually nitrogen fixing bacteria. So whenever these plants are done, I'm not growing them for the fava beans, but these roots have sequestered nitrogen from the air, and they're putting it back in the ground. So cover crops, kind of a neat little part of gardening. Trying it this year. We'll see if it produces for me. But tilled those in about a month ago. And then, so I've decided after tilling those in, I'm going to raise my beds this year. Let's get a fresh start. My old soil's been worked. It's still soft, but I just want to give myself a little more height and a little more new soil. So here's me with my trailer. That's about a full scoop, 1.25 yards of our garden, which is really what I'd recommend for starting a raised bed. Is our garden soil is a great blend of soils, topsoils, compost, and it's really a good way just to get your bed started. So yeah, that's the trailer with a scoop and a quarter, and that scoop and a quarter just about would fill out my. It's about a 4 foot wide, 15 foot bed. That's about enough to fill that bed about 4 inches high. So you can see the fava beans on the right, and basically as I'm putting that soil in, I'm tilling them, pulling them out of the soil, flipping them, and I'm going to work them into the soil to reintroduce nitrogen. So yeah, you can just see the process. You can see the water beside my bed, so you can see how we're keeping the plants out of the water. And I'll give you all kind of a basic idea of my system of doing this raised bed. Is just a real simple hardware store kind of raised bed, and I'll let y'all know how I do that. But yeah, again, this is 1 full scoop of garden. Give y'all an idea of how far that will go. Obviously, it'll compact, and you need to add probably some fertilizer, nitrogen, compost from year to year. Okay, last picture. So this is recently. This is probably a few weeks, a month ago. So I've tilled in the cover crops. We've raised the bed and filled it in and leveled it off. Sorry about the messy yard. Leveled it off to be ready for planting this year. Now, part of this bed I've already put potatoes in, and the potatoes are coming up. The rest of the bed I actually have covered in plastic. I'm just trying to keep this soil as clean from annual weed seeds getting in it. And to have it ready for that planting. So I have what I'm not using covered with plastic because I can in a raised bed. And that's going to keep that area nice and clean. Whenever I get my plants here in the next few weeks, I can plop them right in. I'm ready to go. I'll already tell you, this is starting to dry out. So without 3-4 days of rain, my veggie bed's drying out because it's raised up out of the ground. So do pay attention to watering when you get your bed in. So yeah, this next page, I'm going to give you all kind of what materials I use for this raised bed. It's real simple. It's based off of cedar wood, so it doesn't rot. And my big recommendation is use organic products. Don't use anything treated. Because if it's treated, we worry about it leaching into the soil. So no railroad ties, anything treated with creosote or pressure treated. Kind of a big no-no for veggie gardens. Okay, so my simple raised beds, this is basically how I do it, and you don't really need anything more than a hammer to do this, a hammer and a shovel. So yeah, what I use for my like 4x15 beds, I'm going to do 6 to 8 boards, and I use the dog ear fence strips because that is a rough cut cedar, so it is rot resistant, and they're fairly cheap compared to some of the nicer refined cedar you can get, which you can use. The dog ear fence boards are like $2-3 a piece, maybe a little more right now. Very cheap, very lightweight. And then you can get a pack of wooden contractor stakes, usually with the concrete materials, but like a pack of a dozen or 16 of these 1x2 inch stakes with a tip on them. You can drive those into the ground with a hammer and then put the boards literally on the inside, and when you fill the soil, it'll kind of hold them together. You can use screws for extra stability. You don't have to, and depending on how truly organic you want to go, some screws are treated or coated or painted, so you can really do this with just a hammer and a shovel. Again, for about a 4x15 foot bed with a 4-inch rise for each of those cedar panels. It takes about one large scoop, 1.25 yards of our earth mix to fill. So that's a real simple formula. There's so many things out there. You can use concrete block to do your raised bed. That's going to be a little more permanent. You can do concrete. You can do, I've seen straw bales as your sides for your raised beds, pallets. There's all sorts of things. The big thing is make sure it's an organic product, not treated with a chemical or a sealant, because that will leach into your ground, and we just don't want to be ingesting that. So raised beds, super simple. You can find plans all over for these, but I try to go for simple, affordable, because really what you want to spend your money on are the plants and the soil. So Yeah, absolutely. So this is just my formula. Like I said, quick and simple. I'm sure we can talk about a lot of different things, and yeah, we'll just open up to y'all's questions. Kind of put back on that.
Yeah, I don't have my mic. And I'm tangled up in my headphones.
You can tell me the question, and I can repeat it back.
Well, no, I'm just trying to mention to the folks here that, yes, this is our question and answer period. We're keeping it pretty brief, so if you got any, go ahead and ask away for Ben right now.
Yep.
Because we have to return him to the lot where everybody is desperately needed at the moment.
Yeah, and, we're so busy right now, but we always try to help everyone. I mean, we're all learning in this together, so come on out. We may need to be a little patient during our busy days, but, we'll try to help everyone.
And just to answer you, Mark, this slideshow will be available in our blog category on our website. There's a Bates Botanical Bootcamp webinar archive that this webinar will, the video and the slideshow used will be archived and available, as well as usually a list of useful links. Ben, what do you have there to your right?
Yeah, so we did today, and of course people have been chomping at the bit. I do have a little mini blueberry, that's what I was saying, these bushel and berries. Everything that's bushel and berry is kind of meant for a container little. But the elephant in the room, we did get a shipment of Weeks roses today, and there are just tons of roses on the lot. It'll probably take us a while to get them put out on the lot. But yeah, a lot of people have been asking. Our first rose shipment has arrived. This is Rio Samba. Most of our roses are not in full bloom, so they're ready to bloom here in the next few weeks. Definitely got us all excited and giddy out here. This is a really pretty, very fragrant yellow with kind of an orangey red tip on it. Again, we've got a lot of our Weeks roses in today, or all of our Weeks roses. So hybrid teas, grandiflora, floribundas, all your non-knockout roses. We just got them in today, so we've got something for y'all rose aficionados to shop for.
All right, we got some questions. First of all, Nancy, yes, we do deliver Earth Mix. We deliver Earth Mix to a rather large area in Middle Tennessee as well as parts of Kentucky. You can head to Bates Nursery's website and scroll all the way to the bottom, and there's a little link that says delivery costs under more information. I'm about to pop that in the chat right now, actually.
Got some gnats in here.
And it's based on your zip code. So, boom. There we go. Oh wait, is that the right one? Oh, that's weird. It says shipping returns, but it's delivery cost there. So yeah, check that out. It's a flat fee. I think we deliver up to 4 full scoops of garden at a time. Donald saying, I'm using metal roof siding. Think they dry out some. So I've seen some raised beds with metal roof siding.
Is it metal roof or siding?
Well, isn't that the same thing? It's just galvanized, right?
Yeah. I mean, I would worry about the reflectivity of it. Should be fine, I think. I mean, and if it rusts, I don't think rust is actually something we need to worry about leaching into the soil. I mean, you might want to research what material your metal, I know there's different types of metal they make those panels out of. Just make sure it's not a metal that's going to leach something into the soil. But like typically rust is not something that's going to be a bad thing to eat vegetables out of.
He said, my neighbor filled my beds with scoops of 10-year-old cow manure, and should I put some regular dirt in?
Yeah, I mean, it just depends on how old the manure is. Typically, we consider manure different than compost, and manure basically is raw, has a lot of like nitrogen and urea in it, which can burn plants, where compost has sat for a while. So if the manure has sat for a while, it might be compost and may be safe to plant in. Maybe be safe and mix a little bit of topsoil with it to reduce the urea and the nitrogen.
Okay, Mark, I see your question here. I'm going to go over to Facebook really quick, answering, how do you prepare the ground dirt before you put the topsoil in the box?
Yeah. I mean, I would till it. When I did my bed for the first time, basically I lined out where my area was and tilled all that in as deep as you can till it. If you can go 6 inches deep, 8 inches deep on a till, that's great. Just initially, with a raised bed, typically it's so worked year after year, you won't have to till the raised bed. But yeah, before you put it in, till that underlying soil, so that first year vegetables can set roots in it. You don't necessarily need to kill grass if you have it, but if you do have weeds, you might scrape them off or get rid of them before you till. But yeah, till that ground. At the bare minimum, work it with a rake, and scratch it up.
And speaking of rake, this was a two-parter. Can you also talk about the tools you use to take care of the plants?
Yeah.
Briefly.
Yeah, I mean, obviously trowels for planting and for weeding. A rake, I like a two-sided metal rake that has different tines on it for leveling work in the soil. And then a spade shovel just so you can dig your trenches, dig your big holes, and maybe a flat shovel if you need to dig. But yeah, really, we're just talking different size shovels, a hard metal rake to smooth out and level your soil, and that's pretty much it. Other than any special tools you might need for weeding that make it easier for you, but yeah, just a shovel and a rake.
Alrighty, and then what would be some of the easier veggies to grow for beginners?
Yeah, potatoes. I've had a lot of luck with potatoes.
Me too.
As our local aficionado Austin says, just stick that tater in the dirt. You stick that in the dirt, it is going to grow.
And keep mounding it. That's one thing I didn't do last year, but I will be doing this year.
And that just affects how many potatoes you get. You're still going to get potatoes if you don't mound. Potatoes are easy. They like it dry. Raised beds are good. Bell peppers are pretty much foolproof anyways. And then like tomatoes and corns and all that stuff do well. I do some onion crops, but the onion crops tend to stick around a little longer, so I put them in an area of the bed where I kind of allocate for them to take over. So and then compact varieties, you can fit more in that square space. And then obviously all herbs are going to love raised beds.
He's asking carrots or cucumbers too?
Yeah, carrots, cucumbers. With the vine crops, you just need to give them room to spread. So in a raised bed, I'll usually stick my vining crops like cucumber, squash in the corners so they can actually spread outside the bed, because those crops do take up a lot of room. There's a lot of books on that, like square foot gardening and stuff, that kind of explain how you can strategically plant and get the most out of your space.
FYI, we will be doing a future webinar on square foot gardening.
Yeah.
And we can answer some of these questions you have about veggies more in depth.
Yeah.
Real quick question, when should I start collards and broccoli, etc.? We're kind of past the starting point, right?
Yeah. My big thing is if you are planting collards should be fine, but when we're talking like tender greens, collards actually I think can grow through the warm weather, but like broccoli, spinach, lettuce, I'd imagine if those are in the ground for more than another month, they're probably going to start bolting, and they're not going to be very good. So, cool season crops, we're probably have another month of them, and then, they're probably going to wilt. But collards, mustard greens, you should be able to still grow.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I believe that is all the questions for now, so we are going to go ahead and wrap up.
Cool. Yeah. Glad we could talk. I'm sure we will expound on this because there's a lot of different aspects to veggie gardening. Like I said, just want to give you all a start, at least so if you need to start building, you have some ideas where to go. Come out and see us. I mean, we are not slowing down on the veggies we're bringing in. Annuals veggies are just starting to fly into the nursery. Start getting excited, y'all.